Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our June 2021 WatchGuard webinar. This is Madison Slater. As always, thank you all for attending this month. We've got a couple of fun topics for you, and then we'll be, as always, doing a demo for you guys. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Your lines will all be on mute automatically. This webinar is being recorded. You will be able to play it back from our website a little bit later. The chat window is going to be available to you, so if you have any questions, please send those over and we will be happy to answer those at the end. Any and all WatchGuard questions are welcome, and if I happen to not be able to answer it here during our webinar, I will make sure to follow up with you after the fact. All right, so this month's topics, just a couple of things to talk about this month. We've got our WatchGuard Endpoint Security, an update to DNSWatchGo, and then we're going to be spending some time on a demo learning how to read traffic logs. And as always, we'll share with you some of our upcoming training. So if you are looking for some more official WatchGuard certification training, then we are happy to provide those to you all. I'd like to start out talk about firmware updates. Nothing new since last month, but just in case you were not able to attend during our May webinar, here are our most recent firmware versions. So again, WatchGuard has been doing this thing where they break out the firmware based off of the model. So any XTM devices, our current release is 12.1.3 Update 5. If you have not yet updated to that, we would recommend that you go ahead and jump over to that. Our Firebox T10, T15, things like our M200, M300, those are all now on a 12.5.7 Update 3 release. And then our T20, T40, T80, M series devices like the M470, 670, etc., those are all going to be running on 12.7 Update 1. All of these firmware versions we have tested. We are seeing good results with them. So if you have not upgraded recently, if you're not running on these, then we would recommend you go ahead and plan. Summer's often a good time to get those upgrades done. Got a lot of people out on vacation, so maybe not quite as many people in the office. And we want to make sure we keep our firewalls upgraded so that we're getting the new features, new functionality, and patching any known vulnerabilities that might have been there from a previous version. All right, so one of the things I want to talk about this month is WatchGuard Endpoint Security. So one of the things that WatchGuard has been doing over the last couple of years is focusing on our endpoints. WatchGuard is really trying to transition themselves not just as a firewall company, but as a security company. And while the firewall we consider to be the most important part of the security of a network, it's what controls traffic coming in, it's what controls traffic coming out. It is not the only part of the network. So WatchGuard's been focusing on our endpoints, and there's a couple of reasons for this, but one of the things that I often think about is, you know, I can have my firewall fully licensed, I can have all of the bells and whistles turned on, I can be doing the stuff like DPI and making sure that my traffic is being properly monitored, but what happens when that computer leaves my network? What happens when I take my computer home because I need to work remotely? What happens if I've got a user that is traveling and they're going to be sitting in an airport? Ensuring that our endpoints are properly protected is a vital piece of securing our network, because the last thing we want is for that device to leave our network, pick up something bad on it, bring it back into the environment, and then be able to spread that around. So WatchGuard's been focusing on endpoint protection and endpoint detection over the last few years. And one of the things that they are doing is now combining their two options. So our WatchGuard EPP, if you've heard us talking about this or seen anything about it, this is WatchGuard's Panda protection. So endpoint protection is going to give us things like our AV. We also get web access, device control, so you can do things like patch management and hard drive encryption. You've got some firewall monitoring there. That's going to be our EPP solution. Their ED solution, their endpoint detection and response solution, this is the TDR service, total threat detection and response, which is part of our total security. That is going to, basically it's designed to work alongside our AV, alongside our protection service, to help identify other threats. One of the things that WatchGuard is now making available is combining these two. So we get EPDR. So instead of having multiple agents that we're having to deploy out to our network, we're going to have one option there available to us. So if you have been using Panda, if you're also using TDR, or maybe you've been looking at using both of them, WatchGuard is now looking at ways that we can combine those two together to make sure that we get a really comprehensive view of what we've got going on the endpoint. An update for DNSWatchGo for ChromeOS users. DNSWatchGo is now available for these devices. Now, if you are not familiar with what DNSWatchGo is, this has become one of my favorite services that WatchGuard provides. DNSWatch is a DNS protection service. So what this means is that we can monitor our DNS activity and prevent users from accessing malicious sites. With our DNSWatchGo, this is a client that we install on the endpoint that extends that to that device regardless of where it is. So again, if we've got a device outside of the network, we can extend this DNSWatch protection on it. Now, one of the benefits of using DNSWatch and definitely of using DNSWatchGo is that through that setup, you can do things like content filtering. So when your computer leaves the network, you can control what web access your user has. So if you don't want them looking at gambling sites or malicious content, you don't want them looking at adult material, you can prevent that through DNSWatch. So now DNSWatchGo is available in beta for ChromeOS. So I know that this operating system is really popular in schools. We deal a lot with education, so we've seen a lot of ChromeOS devices out there with our Chromebooks. So now DNSWatchGo has a beta version available for that. DNSWatchGo is something that you license independently. It is not included in your firewall licensing, but the reason for that is that you can license it by the number of endpoints that you want to roll out. I use it here on our endpoints, especially the ones that leave the network, and it's really nice to know that when they are outside of my office, I'm still extending that control. DNSWatch provides phishing protection, so if a user clicks on a link, then it can make sure that they are not hitting that phishing website. It prompts them with some training. So again, with DNSWatchGo, I'm just extending that when they're outside of my environment. So that is available now in beta. If you want to check that out, if you've got some if you've got some ChromeOS devices out there, there is some documentation on how to set that up. Setting it up in the DNSWatchGo portal itself, pretty simple, and then through your Google Admin Center, you can manage that centrally. And just from the DNSWatchGo perspective, so again, it's pretty easy from there. It's very simple that you can go in and grab that setup in there. So easy to get up and going. All right, so now we are going to jump over to our demo, favorite part of the webinar for a lot of people. So what we're going to talk about is learning how to properly read traffic logs. This is something that we get a lot of questions about when it comes to managing our firewalls, when it comes to knowing what kind of access we have available. We want to make sure that we've got those traffic logs available to us to ensure that we can properly monitor the issue. And of course, there we go. Okay, sorry, my Windows has been having a very Windows kind of day. So monitoring traffic logs is something that I get a lot of questions about during our class. It's also something we get questions about from the support side, just not really feeling comfortable with how to read traffic logs. I will say it is something that takes a little practice. It's not something you can necessarily pick up just in a couple of minutes, but I do want to show some tips and tricks for you guys, things that I use when I'm monitoring traffic logs just to help me make sure that I understand what's going on from my device's perspective. And the very first thing before you can really monitor traffic logs is to make sure that you have logging enabled. By default, the firewall logs deny messages, but it doesn't necessarily log a lot of our allow traffic. So you would need to go into your policies and make sure that logging is enabled there. When you go into your policies, if you click on the Property tab, click Logging, and make sure the Send a Log message is created or turned on for that so it's creating those log messages. Now, most of the time when we're talking about troubleshooting, I'm going to be using my Firebox System Manager tool, which is just a tool available to you through WatchGuard System Manager. Firebox System Manager is our live monitoring. The firewall, the WatchGuard Firebox, is not built with an internal hard drive that is designed specifically for storing logs, meaning that it can cache some data, but it's not necessarily sitting on a ton of information. It really is going to depend on how much logging you have enabled as far as how far back you can see in your traffic logs. Most fireboxes, we're going to see around 25,000 log messages being able to be stored. So if you've got a lot of logging turned on, that's probably just going to be a few minutes of time. If you're doing very minimal logging, yeah, you can probably go back a while, but you're not going to see a ton of information. So it's really up to you and how much logging you're turning on. There are tools that you can use to take the logs from the firewall, store them somewhere else. That's going to be our dimension and our cloud visibility, our two primary things that we use. Using Firebox System Manager, this is your live troubleshooting tool. So you've got Betty from accounting on the line. She's unable to hit a website, so you're going to try to watch the logs and have her test it while you're doing that. Now, if Betty from accounting calls you and says, yesterday I wasn't able to get to blank website, this tool is probably not going to be very useful to you. There's lots of features here inside of Firebox System Manager, but when it comes to troubleshooting, Traffic Monitor is going to be the primary place that we're going to be looking. Now, there are several ways that you can break this down, several ways that you can look at this, but the big thing that I want you to understand is that there is a pattern to our traffic logs. Now, before I get into that pattern, I do want to show you a couple of things that you can do just to help change your visual view of this. Any of these settings are specific to your System Manager installation, meaning that if you and one of your coworkers from different computers both have System Manager installed, you're both connected into the same firewall, you change any of your visual settings, does not impact them. So in your Traffic Monitor, if you right-click and go into Settings, there's a couple of things that you can do here. I'm going to restore mine back to the default. The first thing that I always recommend is this maximum log message. So by default, it's actually set to 1, which means that at any point when you're looking at this, the firewall is going to show you a maximum of 1,000 log messages. Now that might seem like a lot, but depending on how much logging you have turned on, 1,000 actually might not be a lot at a time. So if you are finding situations where it just feels like your log messages are flying away before you can even read them, this is possibly what's happening. My recommendation for everybody is to just set that to the max. Set it to 25,000. Give yourself the ability to see as much information as you possibly can. Down here, you have the different traffic log fields. Now, WatchGuard has a preset way that these are being displayed. They are very fond of green and red and white. So, you know, it's kind of hard sometimes to figure out what is what. Change that. So I personally am looking a lot at destination port. So a lot of times I will go in here and highlight my port color to something that is a little bit different just so it stands out. So I'm just going to put it on a bright pink because I'm not using that anywhere else. So now I can see that a little bit easier in my traffic logs. Maybe for you that doesn't really do a lot. I'm very visual. I need things to jump out when I'm looking at it. So that really helps me see that a little bit differently. The other big thing in here is this show log field names. So when we're looking at just our default traffic log view, it's just giving us the information without telling us what that is. If you need to know what it's trying to say, you can say show log field names, and what this will do is give you a little descriptor of what that traffic log actually is. Some people see this as way too much. This is way too much information. A lot of people really like this. Maybe you use it as you're initially learning and then you get to a point where you figure out what the pattern is. But those are just some of the things from a visual perspective that might be able to help you. More than anything, though, in those settings, I really recommend you set that 25,000 so that you can see as many log messages as possible. Now, when we're reviewing traffic logs, up here at the top, you've got your filter on the type of log that you're looking at. So you've got all logs, which will show absolutely everything, the traffic logs themselves, your alarm logs, your event logs, your debug logs, and then your performance statistics. Depending on what you're troubleshooting, that can dictate which of your log types you're looking at. Most of the time, though, if Betty in accounting is having problems getting to a website, it's your traffic logs that you want to look at first. Now, you can also, you've got a filter option over here. So if I figure out what Betty from accounting, what her IP is, I can always go in and narrow that down a little bit if I want to. All right, and then finally, you've got your pause and continue button down at the bottom. These logs keep rolling. So if you think you've found what you're looking for, hit pause. That way you can see if you can monitor the log to see if it's actually what you needed it to be. Now, the way that I like to read these, again, the first thing to understand is that there is a pattern. So even though this might seem a little bit chaotic at first, once you realize that there's a pattern, it can make it a lot easier for you to understand. So let's focus on the information that's over here in our different highlighted areas. So the first thing that you're going to see is the date and time of the log. It is very important on your firewall, in your policy, if you go under Setup, System, make sure that the time zone is set correctly. Otherwise, your timing here is going to be wacky and you're not going to be able to figure out what it is. So make sure that your timing is set correctly. Then you're going to have the message, the action message. So allow, deny, it's basically giving you a very quick indicator, was that traffic allowed through or did the firewall stop it? Next, we're going to have here, the default white is our source IP. Where did the traffic come from? Now, depending on what the traffic is, that could be an internal IP. It could be an external IP. If it's internal, it means it's a connection coming from inside of our network. If it's external, it means it's something trying to come in. Next, we have our destination IP. So you can see where I'm hitting things like 8.8.8.8. That's where the traffic is going to. Again, depending on the direction of traffic, it could be an external IP, it could be an internal IP. Next, we have our traffic type and protocol. Now, traffic type, if the firewall can figure it out. So if it knows port 23 TCP or UDP, port 53, okay, that's typically DNS. 443 TCP, that's HTTPS. If it's not sure, it's just going to tell you the port number and the protocol. This next number, this number here in white, this is the source port. This is the port that the traffic was coming from. The vast majority of the time, we don't really need to worry about that, but it's going to show us that just in case we need that from a troubleshooting perspective. What I changed to be highlighted in pink, this is our destination port. This is what it's actually going through the firewall on. This is, from a policy perspective, what actually matters. So if I don't have that port open, then I'm going to have trouble getting that traffic through. Next, we have our source interface. So my traffic is coming from my trusted interface, and then we have the destination interface. So this is going out my external. This up here is hitting my firebox. Next, you have your disposition. So this could say a variety of things: proxy allow, HTTPS request. It could be something as simple as allowed. It could be something like DNS forwarding. This is basically giving you a simple understanding of what the firewall is doing with that traffic. These next two numbers, I will be honest, in the 8 years that I have been working with WatchGuard, I have never had to concern myself with those. That is your packet length and time to live. It's there, but most of the time we don't have to worry about that. And then finally, we have in parentheses our policy name. So this will tell you through the firewall if it's what policy it is. You might also see internal policy, meaning that the firewall has an internal configuration, something outside of the policies that is allowing or denying that traffic. Beside of that, you might see something else. This is going to be your proxy action if it is a proxy policy. Now that seems like a lot, but I do want you to understand that there is a pattern to this. And again, if you need help with that pattern, right-click, go into settings, say show log field names, and it will tell you exactly what that piece of information is that I just gave you. It is possible to copy your text, copy it out, paste it into Excel. If you think you found it, but you need a different way to look at it, paste it into Excel if you want to then change it into different columns so you can see it a little bit easier. But that pattern is going to exist in the vast, vast majority of your traffic logs. Now, there are two types of traffic logs, and I'm not seeing any on my firewall, but two that I want you to be aware of, things that you can very commonly see on your firewall: unhandled internal packets and unhandled external packets. What an unhandled packet is a piece of traffic trying to flow through the firewall, but it doesn't have a pathway. It doesn't have a policy for it to get through. So an unhandled internal packet, unhandled internal policy log, I should say, if you are seeing that on your firewall, that is something inside of your network trying to get out, trying to pass through the firewall. It doesn't have a policy. So let's say I've got RDP closed from leaving my network. I am sitting on my computer trying to RDP to an external device. It's not working. In my traffic logs, I would see unhandled internal packet. An unhandled external is something outside of the network trying to get in. So when we are talking about maybe someone's trying to do a port scan on us, something like that, then that could very easily lead to an unhandled external policy, unhandled external packet trying to get through. If you are seeing those on your firewall, it's not a bad thing. It means the firewall is doing its job. It's stopping traffic from getting through because there's not a policy. Now, maybe Betty from accounting is trying to run a new application and it's not working. You're seeing unhandled internal packets. That could be an indicator that you need to write a new policy. So those things are not bad. It just means that the firewall is doing its job. I've definitely gotten questions about that throughout the years. Should I be concerned about this? No, it's the firewall doing what it's supposed to. The only reason you should be concerned is if that traffic isn't working, and in which case it's just as simple as writing a policy. Now, all of the remaining information over here, this is where it can get a little complicated. So this is a lot of information. It ultimately is going to come down to what type of policy it is, what type of services you have turned on, what type of logging you have enabled as far as what you see to the right. The big thing that I will stress, don't ignore it. A lot of people look at this and they think my brain doesn't comprehend that, that doesn't make sense, so they just ignore this information over here to the right. It is important when you are reading traffic logs that you read the entire log message. Some of it might not make sense. So process ID, message ID, proxy action. Okay, I know what proxy action is. That's part of my policy. OP post, don't know what that is. Destination name. Okay, that makes sense. That means that's where I'm going. If you read through this, you might not know what every piece of that log message stands for. That's fine. I'll be honest, there's plenty of this that I look at and I don't need to worry about it. That's not something that I'm concerned with when it comes to troubleshooting. But there's other stuff that I could be seeing in here. So action, WB_elevated. Well, I know from my policy, from my configuration, that I have a web blocker action called WB_elevated. So this is telling me that this traffic log is associated with that web blocker. CATS is category, information technology. Okay, so I know that it's my web blocker information technology category that it's talking about. I could see things in here like source user equals. If I'm doing authentication, I'm going to see that attached to a particular user. Geodest, DST, that's geodestination. That comes from my geolocation. Reading traffic logs takes a little bit of time and it takes practice, but the big thing that I see people mess up on is not reading the entire log. Don't worry if there's a piece of it that doesn't make sense. But if you think you found the log line that you are looking for, if you think you found the deny message, read through to the end, because it could very well, over in what seems like gibberish in this area, it could very easily be telling you what that information is. All traffic logs are going to be slightly different, again, depending on the policy, depending on the type of logging that you have turned on, but they will follow some sort of pattern. Use the pause and continue down at the bottom. That helps so much because that traffic just keeps flowing. don't be afraid to do what I do. I honestly have been doing this for years, where I change the port color because I need to see it stand out. If things like the log field names help you, use it. There's no right or wrong way to read traffic logs. It really just comes down to how you interpret it the best way. I know that's a quick and a quick overview of traffic logs. There's definitely a lot more that can go into that, but hopefully some of those tricks will help you if you've been having some trouble with that. As always, if you ever have questions, if you're having trouble with trying to figure out what your traffic logs are saying, we are more than happy to help out any way that we can. All right. Next, just real quick before we end, and I apologize, my PowerPoint is being difficult. We do have some upcoming training classes here in the next few months. We offer training classes every 3 weeks. So we've got one next week. If you are looking for some last-minute training, come join us. All of our classes are offered in person and virtual. And the virtual experience, the only difference is you don't have to sit and stare at the instructor. You get to see our screen, though. You get the full training environment experience. All of that is going to be exactly the same. So we've got a Charlotte class next week. We've got a Las Vegas class coming up in July. So if you really want to go out west, experience some 110-degree, no humidity weather, Las Vegas is always a lot of fun. We've got a Georgia class coming up at the end of July, another Vegas class mid-August, and then back to Atlanta in September. We always are happy to offer custom on-site training, so if you've got a lot of people in your organization, it's not feasible to get everybody out to class, then please feel free to hit us up when we are happy to do some custom on-site training for you as well. All right, and we will finish up here. If any of you have questions, please feel free to send those over, and I'll be happy to answer those. If you don't have any questions, as always, thank you for joining us this month. If you ever have suggestions or things that you would like for us to talk about, demos you would like to see, please feel free to shoot those over to me. I'll be happy to work those in. We want to make this as relevant as we possibly can, so anything that you might want to know about, we are happy to cover here in our monthly demos. All right, not seeing any questions. Again, thank you all for your time this month. We really appreciate it. I hope you all stay cool out there. I know it's getting really hot, very humid around here. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you all next month.